Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar with Turnkey Technologies and Binary Stream today. We're glad you could join us. I'm Luke. I'm with Turnkey Technologies here. I'm on the marketing side for us, and we're just going to go ahead and talk today about Binary Stream and their P&LM within GP and Business Central. So, with further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Binary Stream and let them take it from here.
Thank you so much, Luke, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Taimur Tariq, the Product Marketing Manager at Binary Stream, and I'm thrilled to be co-hosting today's webinar alongside my colleague, Nick Petrolini, who is the technical expert on Property and Lease Management solution. So, and a big thank you to Luke as well from Turnkey Technologies. So today's webinar is designed for both Business Central and GP users. And whether you've already transitioned to Business Central or in the process of thinking about it, we're here to show you how Binary Stream's Property and Lease Management solution can help you streamline operations and ensure compliance with IFRS 16 and ASC 842 and make the transition to Business Central as smooth as possible. So what we have, a quick look at what we have in store for you today. First, we'll introduce who Binary Stream is for those of you who are not already familiar with us, and share what makes Binary Stream a trusted partner in the Microsoft ecosystem. Next, I'll spend a brief moment bringing our solutions to life through our Dynamics stack, which is our suite of products on Great Plains, Business Central, as well as Finance and Operation. And then, of course, my favorite part of the presentation is showcasing real-world examples, and then Nick will jump in and share how Property and Lease Management simplifies lease administration for both lessees and lessors, and what are some of the key industries that are benefiting from our solution, and how does Binary Stream support the transition from GP to Business Central. And then last but not the least, a live demo showcasing the solution in action. And this is an interactive session, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat through the webinar, and we'll try to answer as many as we can and see if leave some time in the end for questions and answers as well. So at Binary Stream, we don't just integrate with Microsoft, we are deeply embedded in the ecosystem, and that means that we live and breathe Microsoft technology, and everything that we create is designed to align seamlessly with Microsoft's vision and their innovation roadmap. And our commitment to streamlining Microsoft ERP integration and reducing the cost, boosting efficiency, it has earned us the trust of over 3,000 customers, as you can see, across 25 countries. And being a Microsoft preferred solution and also part of Microsoft Inner Circle, it means that we have direct access to Microsoft's latest innovations, insights, and best practices. And I mentioned earlier how our solutions are fully embedded in the Microsoft ecosystem. They're also available on AppSource, which makes the implementation seamless for partners and users. And for Microsoft partners, this translates into trusted high-quality solutions that enhance their offerings. And for Microsoft customers, it ensures that they get future-proof, fully supported, and Microsoft-backed solutions that can evolve with their business needs. So simply put, when you choose Binary Stream, you're choosing a Microsoft trusted solution that is built for long-term success. Now that you understand our position within the Microsoft ecosystem, let's quickly dive into our solutions that we have built to support businesses across every stage of their ERP journey. The solutions span across all Microsoft ERPs, as you can see, from Great Plains to Business Central and Finance and Operations. And that ensures that we support your growth, your transition, as well as your migration as your business evolves. And what's at the heart of all of our solutions is that they're built by accountants, and they're built for your accounting and finance team. And that is showcased when we serve a variety of different industries, addressing their unique accounting and compliance challenges, whether it's healthcare, hospitality, manufacturing, logistics, or what will be the focus of today's presentation, property and lease management in the real estate industry. On the left, you see multi-entity management. That solution is a comprehensive solution built for intercompany and consolidation accounting challenges, where you can simplify intercompany transactions for real-time consolidated reporting, and also have a streamlined process for adding new companies in Business Central and maintaining a global master record to avoid any duplication and also to synchronize your data. And so many of our clients and customers, they combine the power of MEM with our subscription billing solution, or even property and lease management solution. For example, with subscription billing, they have the power to manage subscriptions across multiple entities and companies, and even divisions and subsidiaries as well. And for property and lease management, they can handle lease management and compliance across multiple entities, and also handle intercompany transactions all within one system. And last but not the least is the healthcare material management solution, which provides advanced inventory and a procurement to payment solution, eliminating inefficiencies, reducing costs, and most importantly, ensuring that essential materials are available to healthcare workers when needed. Now that we've covered how binary solutions are deeply embedded in Microsoft ecosystem, let's dive into today's focus, which is property and lease management. And to walk us through how the solution simplifies lease administration, compliance, and enhances financial controls, I'm going to pass it over to Nick, who is going to give us a demo of the solution as well as walk us over the solution. Over to you, Nick.
All right, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so for anybody on the call that I haven't worked with in the past, my name is Nick Petrolini. I'm a solution consultant with Binary Stream, and I do specialize in our BC suite of solutions, so Business Central specifically. And of course, today we're going to walk through the property and lease management version of those solutions that we can provide for the Dynamics platforms in Microsoft's ecosystem. So the property and lease management, and this slide has a lot of text on it. Don't worry about reading all that. We'll make the slides available after today's call as well. But essentially, I'm going to walk through kind of what the purpose of the solution is, what kind of benefits our users are experiencing, and hopefully provide an answer if those benefits can translate to you and your team and potentially in the future. So the main sort of source of why we developed this solution in the first place, it was the addition of new accounting standards for actually accounting for leases, whether you're a lessor or a lessee or both in some cases, and specifically around the IFRS and US GAAP equivalents of those accounting standards, being your IFRS 16 and ASC 842 as time already outlined. And so, I have some experience in the past as an auditor, and I actually went through the adoption of that process for a few of my clients in the past. And so I know that, handling that calculation in a spreadsheet in Excel, depending on the number of leases you have, can get pretty unwieldy at times, and especially as you grow and continuously add new leases to your portfolio, that can really get outgrown and quite quickly. And so this solution is really designed to bring all of that directly into your ERP platform, have all of those calculations done for you automatically, so that your accounting teams aren't having to go in and manually check all those different cells, make sure they're not breaking references, things like that, and ultimately give you the best tools for reporting and analysis, as well as preparation of your periodic financial statements as well. And that's really what we see here in the benefits outlined here. So I got a little ahead of myself, but essentially that's what this solution is designed to give you: a digital portfolio of all of your leases in a single place, and something that's directly tied to your set of accounting books. So something that can post directly to your accounts, generate those journal entries that are required for the amortization of those lease accounts, right? Your right of use asset or lease liabilities in the case of a lessee, and ultimately get you to that reporting standard that you need at the end of the year or the end of the quarter, however frequently you're getting to those financial statements. So now, on this slide's a bit of a preview of the workflow that I'm going to walk through. It might not make a whole lot of sense, at this point, not having seen the product. But if we just kind of walk through a day in the life of actually creating a new we use the term property, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical property. It could be a piece of equipment or really anything that you would be entering into a lease for. I'll go through creating a new one, a new lease card that is, adding the different charge types that would be attached to that agreement, changing some of the details around what the length of that agreement is, and ultimately all of those inputs that can affect that lease accounting standard calculation at the beginning of the lease. And then we'll walk through the actual management of that in terms of creating your periodic invoices, as well as the journal entries to update those lease accounts. And finally, we'll go through the reporting and forecasting that's available in the solution, and go through a couple of those examples of key reports that I find, based on my experience with customers and users, provide the most value for them. So actually, at this point, let's jump over to my Business Central environment. I'm gonna exit that because there we go. So here you should see my Business Central homepage. And as Timur outlined in the beginning, but I'll just reiterate it here. Everything that is binary stream specific, even though we are an independent ISV, we work exclusively with Microsoft's suite of products, or suite of platforms, really. And really the advantage that allows us is that everything is fully integrated within the ERP platform itself. So you will never see me, enter into a third screen or anything like that. It's designed as if it's an additional module in the Business Central platform here. And I know we also mentioned it does work for GP and F&O. We are going to focus on the BC side here, but just keep in mind that all of this functionality also exists in those other platforms, and we have a number of users who are still using it in GP today. Of course, there's just going to be a little bit of a different user interface and experience here, but the functionality rings true throughout all of those platforms. Down here, we'll start with actually going into our lease list, or our lease portfolio here, where if I go down the list here, I can see all of my open leases at this point. Now, there's no limit to the number of leases you can have. There's no volume-based licensing component either. It's strictly on a user-by-user basis. So, based on your volume, it's never going to be the case that you're gonna kind of pay more as you grow, or also you're never going to hit that limit. And you can see here, I also have a mixture of the two types, revenue and expense, which is essentially, are you the lessor and or the lessee in this specific agreement? And so again, I'll just reiterate, we can handle both. They're ultimately treated very similarly, but of course, the accounting on the back end is then adjusted a little bit based on those classifications. Now, the reporting standard's a little bit more complex as a lessee, so I'm actually going to start with that perspective and starting a new lease. But then I'll also flash up a revenue one, just to show you that ultimately they follow the same workflow. One of the main differences being that when we actually invoice, of course, you're generating a sales invoice rather than a purchase invoice as well. But let's just get into actually creating a new lease card here first. Okay. So you can see here, and if you've already, if you're already familiar with Business Central, the UI is very similar to any other screen in Business Central. You kind of have your header and your lines based on your lines being kind of your detail information of the different charges that would be attached to a lease, and the header kind of being that agreement level information. Being able to set, of course, who the lessor, who's actually providing the asset is to you. But also we can break down and actually the first decision I have to make on this lease card is the category of lease that I'm going to enter into on this new lease agreement here. So these categories are fully user configurable. So depending on the industry that you or your clients are operating in. You can set these different categories based on what you need ultimately. And I know some of the industries that we outlined at the beginning are, of course, a property management company or, real estate, anything along those lines. But there's also other industries that we serviced, and actually a good example and a recent one that comes to mind is, we actually have a golf course who just signed up to use our solution because they end up leasing all of their golf carts and they want to track those in the lease cards, and they have to track, different complexities like, annual abatements in the off season, different price adjustments based on timing of the lease as well. And so, just because it is kind of a property specific solution doesn't mean that's all it can handle. It can handle equipment, it can handle vehicle fleets, anything that may be attached to a long-term lease. Now, in this case, I'm going to select just a commercial property. But again, doesn't change the workflow at all, depending on the different categories. It's just different. You can set different levels of identification per category. It's really the main difference. I'll select a vendor here, and ultimately that's just the vendor list in BC, but that in this case, of course, translates to the lessor of the asset. I have to select my lease accounting standard. Now, again, there might be some calculation on the back end to first off identify, whether this should be an operating lease or a finance lease, should be, short-term lease if it's less than a year. So ultimately, you do have to decide that as the user. But once that's decided, then it will dictate how those lease accounts get calculated on the back end. Okay. And then I'm just going to select my start date. So let's say it starts at the beginning of March. Now, if there's partial periods or anything like that that have to be accounted for, you see that toggle here in the header. You can prorate for any partial periods if you need to normalize that billing period to a different date than what that period starts as. So we do have a lot of flexibility in how we can adjust that. And now, before I get down to actually adding an asset to the lease, just want to turn your attention to the top ribbon, and there's a variety of options here, and ultimately we could go down a lot of kind of rabbit holes to talk about each and every one of these. In the short time we have today, I'm just going to touch on them and ultimately show you what kind of options are available to attach to a lease card. But of course, if you have questions that are specific, please let us know in the chat, or I believe Luke provided a link that you can send those questions to, and we'll do our best to get those at the end of get to those at the end of today's session. But here, just to outline some of those options, participants, if you want to split who's actually taking on the bill, I guess it's more for the lessor side. If let's say you have co-tenants or something like that, so you're splitting the invoice 50-50 or 70-30. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what that split is, but you can have multiple sort of almost like bill to customers, right? But in this case, bill to tenants as part of the same lease. You can see deposits. I can, actually create the journal entry for collecting a deposit or even sending a deposit if you're the lessee, right? And then deposit return just reverses that at the end of the period. You can see I have the ability to terminate or partially terminate. Again, just giving you that flexibility and management and giving you easy access to, any journal entries that would be required in that termination, or partial termination for that matter. And then we're going to get into the ability to create invoices and that in a few minutes once we go through the final pieces of creating this lease. So skip that for now, and I'll jump to the assign equipment or fixed assets. As it says, it's pretty self-explanatory. Because we have the full integration with BC, we can actually have the fixed assets in the fixed assets module get attached to your individual leases. So that way you always have that link to, a certain vehicle or a certain property in the case you're the lessor, and you have that link to, the depreciation books or any repairs that would be made on that property. But then you also have that other way of the link where you can see what's actually being charged for, the use of that asset from your tenant. Okay. All right, so now that we've kind of gone through all that, let's finish off the creation of this lease card. And where we left off was actually adding a lease term. So you can see I have a variety of templates here where it has a defined period of time. Now these templates, you don't have to have a template pre-configured. Essentially, if I go and create a new one here, you can see it's just going to save it as I continuously add those different lease terms here. So of course, because I use this environment quite a bit to do demos, I've amassed quite a long list here. But if you have a few key terms that you always use, this would be much shorter, of course. And then of course, if anything comes up that's more of a one-off situation, you can quickly add it here. And you can, basically identify, well, it doesn't like that I didn't put a code in there, but you can basically identify what the frequency of billing is and how many periods that ultimately amounts to. And that's all you have to do to set one of those up. But I'm just going to add one that I already have set here. Maybe it's, I don't know what happened. Maybe timed me out or something. Sorry about that. Let me quickly refresh. Edit. There we go. All right, so let's add a 5-year. See, it's quickly on that calculation of how many months it would be, and our end date. Now select a building. Now these properties, in the case, in this case, I've already selected the category, so I'm only going to get the properties and pieces of equipment that are identified under that category. But these properties also do have to be specifically configured in a table under the category classification. But again, it's pretty simple. It's a matter of identifying the configuration of the property. This is again more for the lessor perspective, where you have a property and it may be broken down into multiple units. In the case of a lessee, it's you're probably just adding those individual assets that you're ultimately leasing from a provider. Here, if I select my floor, I get down to my 3rd level, and this is where I could see the individual unit that would be attached to the lease. But it doesn't necessarily have to just be one either. You can add multiple assets to the same lease card. So for example, if it is 2 units that are attached to the same lease, then, or as part of the same agreement, then I can add, as many are needed as that agreement defines as well. And then of course, while we're talking about the agreement level, just like any other screen in BC, if you want to attach a document, maybe it's a signed PDF contract of the actual lease terms themselves, we of course give you the ability to do that here. So you're never losing any of that visibility of, all of the checks and balances that are required if, you ever need to go back and find historical documentation for an audit or something like that. But we all really, I'll harp on this again. The purpose of this solution is to give you all of that lease level information in a single platform without having to manage that, across different solutions, whether it's spreadsheets or another outside platform. We want to give you that one source of truth here to eliminate a lot of the confusion and a lot of the overhead, quite frankly, of actually managing your lease portfolio on a day-to-day basis. Here, I'm going to go into a specific unit now. So we've kind of done everything here in identifying the asset and the length of the lease agreement and all those other terms. What we haven't done yet is actually added the different types of charges that are attached to this lease. So that's what we're going to do next here. And you can see I've opened up this table called P&LM charges. Essentially, these are, the different charges that you can configure, again, specific to the different accounts you want to post to based on the different charge types. So you can think of them essentially as almost like posting groups, or almost like, service items that then can have their own posting group. But here I'm going to add obviously a flat rental amount. Let's say it's $5,000 a month. I can add, a meter where that consumption volume is going to change from period to period. So whether it's, utilities or water, some other consumption level, doesn't really matter ultimately. I can go and attach a meter. It actually looks like I'm out of meters. Let's say it's a new meter. Let's call it, water, something like that, right? Just to be simple. And you can see I have a third miscellaneous here, and that doesn't mean by any means that, you're capped at 3 different charge types. You can add as many as are required. But here I just have a miscellaneous charge. Let's say it's a one-time repair, right? Which kind of highlights the other ability to change the frequency of billing based on the actual charge type. So they don't all necessarily have to follow that same structure. So that way, if there is a one-time, kind of ad hoc charge attached to a lease, you can still keep that, connection to the agreement or the asset that it's attached to, but you don't necessarily have to set it up as a recurring charge if there's no basis for doing so, right? Let's say it's a $10,000 charge, and I actually have to set a rate for my meter. Let's just say it's $1 per unit. Makes it nice and easy for us there. Okay, so we have 3 charges in this case. And of course, they can all be treated differently. So they all actually produce their own billing schedule here when we go into the details, or the billing details, as you see here on the screen. So you can see the solution doing a lot of work in the back end, kind of creating a schedule here based on, some key inputs. And we can even customize this further as we go forward here. So that's what we're going to do first. But as I go through this schedule, I'll also just emphasize that nothing is being posted at this time. So it's not posting any of these to the future. It's simply holding all of these different billing dates and billing amounts as a reference, so that when I go ahead and run my invoice creator, the system knows exactly what to pull onto each invoice based on, the effective dates of these billing lines and what the amount is calculated as for that billing period. Right? And that $5,000, that is just a base amount. So whatever, that lease payment starts at would be that amount that you select in the previous screen there. You can see at this point, it's just 60 months of $5,000 per month as a billable amount. Now, that doesn't take into account the fact that there could be price adjustments throughout that lease agreement, right? So in a 5-year lease agreement, like I have up here, you might have annual price increases, whether that's based on a flat rate, like a flat amount, maybe it's a $500 increase each period, or each year, excuse me, or is it based on, a percentage? And we can handle both of those situations. We can even handle if it's based on a CPI or a rate schedule. But if I say, it's an annual price increase after the first year, let's go down to March 2026 here. Say that's my first price adjustment date, and it recurs annually, which is a very common situation in the case of property leases, less so in equipment leases, but it can happen. And you can see here, I can add a 5% increase every year, right? Or whatever that percentage gets identified at. Now, as soon as I click off that line, you can see that calculation take place, where it's not only set it up for that first price adjustment period, but because I've set this up as an annually recurring price adjustment, each period on March 1st of the next year, there's an additional 5% increase, right? And you can see that throughout the term as we go down the list. You can see that amount growing. Now you can stop that at a certain period. Again, you can add different, if that rate ends up being 3% in the, last 3 years, you can set up as many lines here as you want to set that up to match whatever the details of that lease agreement outline on day one. And then, of course, if there are adjustments or renegotiations that happen in a renewal, then you can add those at a later date as well. So it's super flexible in how it allows you to manage that schedule of what's to be billed each period. But also it will recalculate what the impact of that is on the lease accounts as well, which we'll get into here in a minute. Okay, so really powerful in taking a lot of this, every period kind of reconciliation activities that an accounting team might have to go through to make sure that what they're calculating their books matches the invoices that they're receiving, matches whatever they have attached to the original lease agreement, and then translating that into a reporting figure on all those specific lease accounts. This eliminates 90% of that work, and in fact maybe even more, based on the level of kind of automation you can set here. And then it's simply just an approval, making sure that you're going through, making sure that that matches the reports ultimately, which it always will, because it's coming out of the same platform using those same figures. Now, last thing here in this screen, we also have the ability to attach abatements. So much like the price adjustment, if let's say there's a rent-free period for the first 6 months of this contract, or the first 3 months, you can set that up to be recurring. I can set my abatement amount. Again, I just have that in my general setup, so it always defaults to that account there. But let's say it is those first 3 months that are free. I come in here and say, okay, I got a $5,000 recurring abatement for the first 3 months while I get this property set up. And you can see it calculates that on the line, nets it out, and so you shouldn't expect to be billed anything for that period. I can delete that for now, so we actually have something to invoice. So that's the billing side of it, the actual cash flows that should be expected throughout the period that lease. Now we get to the accounting standard, which is the really fun stuff of having to calculate the present value of the lease payments, translate that to your lease liability balance and your right of use asset as the lessee. I know the accounts differ slightly on the lessor side, but the same calculation methodology is used to get to those lease account balances. That should be there on day one. And you can see here, if we start at the header, I have a variety of different inputs that I can attach to this lease as well. So if you know the residual amount and there's a purchase option at the end of the lease, I can add those here. And if they affect those lease accounts, then that calculation will be done automatically. Actually, we can mess around with that here as well. If it's 100,000 and 120, you can see it's going to kind of, well, actually, let's make it less than the residual amount, 80, right? You can see it's going to change those accounting numbers based on those inputs, and you can see it's calculating that present value in real time. Now, in this case, I know for the accountants in the room that would make this a finance lease. And in this case, we have it set as an operating lease, so we'll get rid of those before I go up in flames. Then you can see I can also add any incentives or direct costs that would have to be amortized over that period as well. And you can make those adjustments as they come up. Ultimately, the bottom line is what gets generated is this amortization schedule here, which, just like the billing schedule we just looked at, it's not posting any of these to the future. It's simply providing a calculation that normally, I've seen most accounting teams who don't have a solution like this doing this sort of calculation in Excel. which, as I mentioned at the onset, can get pretty unwieldy. I've had countless Excel documents crash on me as I'm going through and recalculating certain fields, and that never feels good. Here, you have that all on your ERP platform, so there's no more need for that Excel management. And it will provide those periodic journal entries for you to be posted directly to the GL as we go through this month-to-month management of this lease. That includes also giving you an initial journal entry for that first period. See here, it also keeps an audit trail of who's doing that. And I can bypass this because I'm an administrator. But what I just did is I created this journal entry. It will actually prepare those accounts and the balances that need to be attached. And you could see, probably only expected 2 lines there, the lease liability and the right of use asset, but it's also giving me a short-term calculation if you want it. So for anything that's within the year, you can get your short-term lease liability. I happen to be posting them to the same account here, but you can see the split that it's doing where it's calculating what is less than a year out and calculating that as a current liability rather than a non-current. Now from here, I can go ahead and just post this immediately. And that's going to start that amortization table ticking, actually give us the opportunity to invoice for the next period and prepare the journal entry for us as well as we go through that invoice process. But hopefully that gives you a good sense of how the solution logically gets to those lease accounting standards. In this case, we're talking US GAAP, but the same principles apply for the IFRS standards. And if you do have leases that are exempt from this level of management or this level of reporting, you can also identify those as exempt leases and kind of skip this step entirely. But hopefully that gives you an understanding of the power of the solution and taking a lot of that, ultimately that manual headache off your accounting team's plates to give them, some time back to work on other more valuable activities. Okay. So let's go back here. Actually delete this line since we didn't actually attach anything to it. Now, while I'm here, I also want to show the invoice creator here. Now, this is not just an invoice creator. It also creates the journal entries. And it's got me in the future. So let me go back in time a little bit. But here, I can see all of the lines that are ready to be billed for up to the cutoff date I select in the header. So this as of date. It's as of today's date, of course. And so since we didn't put anything in the meter, it's only giving us the miscellaneous one-time amount that I input, but also the first period of rent. If I scroll over here to the right, you can see those amounts, the base $5,000 per month, and that $10,000 one-time fee. Right? Now from here, it's really quite simple to actually create in this case, the purchase invoice, but in the case of the lessor and creating the invoice, of course, be a sales invoice. But you can see it also creates the journal entry for the update of those accounting standards and the actual, ticking of the amortization of those amounts. So all I have to do here is select those and process. And while I do that, I'll also explain, this is just for a specific lease, the way I entered into it, but we have this exact same invoice creator screen available for, and my apologies, looks like I got error. I think it's that miscellaneous amount, which I may have not set up properly. Apologize for that, but that's okay. It created the journal entry, which is the key piece I wanted to look at anyways. But I'll finish that thought I was explaining, the invoice creator, we looked at it just for a specific lease, but you can enter into that same screen for all of your leases at once and run all of those invoicing practices and all of the journal entries in a single batch or mini batches, however you need to filter on them. But that way you're not having to go into each individual lease and run that, 100 different times if that's the number that you're managing, right? Potentially 1,000, multi-thousands. You can do it all as a single batch. But what we get from, management of those lease accounting standards, I get this, journal entry prepared for me again, based on the calculation of that amortization table. And from here, I can go directly to posting this once I've kind of reviewed it. It looks good. It's going to the correct accounts. And my accounts might not directly link to yours, but as part of the configuration, that would be, or as part of the implementation, excuse me, that would be part of the configuration, is getting those linked exactly to what those accounts are identified as in your own individual chart of accounts. And from here, I can post that. And now I have an updated lease liability and ROU asset for that lease specifically. And I can see a link to that journal entry here. You can see where things were posted. I can see that I'm up to date on the actual management of this lease. And again, I can go back to this accounting standard if I really want to go and see what that's going to be in the future for a specific lease. But we also have reports to generate the disclosure of these accounts for your financial reporting purposes and requirements ultimately. Again, we looked at that from the perspective of a lessee. The same functionality exists as a lessor, of course. And we won't go through the whole process again, because ultimately it's 95% repetitive. Really the only difference is, let's go to a revenue lease here, and this is actually for a piece of equipment. But the same logic applies. I've added, it's a 1-year period in this case. I have multiple assets attached to this. And if I go to my lease charges, again, I can attach very specific lease charges that are identified in the lease agreement. And you can see I can have, multiple lease charges again, including common area maintenance or sales-based rent that might get charged. Again, depending on how frequently those come up, you can have those attached as a default as well. If I go to the charge details, you can see same level of scheduling. And you can see in this case, I've billed for a couple periods. Now this is an exempt lease, so I don't have the journal entry attached. But you can see it's just posting a standard Business Central sales invoice that I can go and drill into directly from the lease card or from the invoice back to the lease. It's a two-way link there. And I can see exactly what was charged for at that period, right? So again, just the beauty of the integration between the two, the platform of Business Central and the additional solution of Property and Lease Management always gives you that, seamless linkage between your accounting entries, the supporting documents, and ultimately that, lease agreement standard that you can find in the lease card here. So what does that mean for end users or users of financial statements, people in your accounting team who are preparing those financial statements? All of that kind of gets wrapped up into a nice little bundle in the reports that are available for all of our users just directly out of the box here. So there's a list of about 15 or so reports, maybe even a couple more. But they cover things like your rent roll, which I actually have prepared an example for before this. The other one that is very crucial to a lot of our users who are having to prepare it as a footnote in their financial statements is this lease disclosure report, which is a key requirement as part of the ASC 842 standards, as well as the IFRS standards. And you can see here, I can get directly to that lease disclosure statement. Here, if I'm, let's go back in time and say I'm preparing this for the end of 2024. I can prepare, I can send this to Excel or Word or PDF, whatever file type is most desirable for you. In this case, I'm just going to preview it, and it'll give me a PDF preview here. And what I should see is exactly what I would need to include on my financial statements as supporting documentation for that line on my balance sheet of what's my finance lease, ROU asset, operating lease equivalent, and the lease liability for each as well as the calculation of the weighted average lease term and discount rate. Okay. So you always have that available for you at your fingertips for however frequently you're doing your reporting. So that's more of a financial reporting requirement type report. But then there's a variety of reports as well, just for internal decision making or internal forecasting. You can see revenue forecast in case you're leasing out many properties. Rent roll report, which actually I just prepared in advance, just since it takes a couple minutes to generate based on your volume of leases here. But if we look at what's included on this report, let me zoom in a little further so you can actually see. But you can see my different categories, and it has a different sheet per category, so you always get that kind of breakdown of your different classifications of assets. You can see by property or by asset, by floor, by unit, and you can see all the details around when that lease starts and ends, and what the different charges that are attached to that lease are, and the annualized amount of what you should expect to see in terms of cash flow from those individual leases there. Okay. So again, that's just a couple examples. We don't have time today to go through all of these different reports, but just wanted to give you a feel there. And if there are specific reports that aren't included here that you need to rely on for your internal practices, then we also do integrate with Power BI as well as other third-party apps, Solver and Jet Reports, where those kind of customized reports that are built just for you can be configured for you and for your team. So I know we're coming up on time, so I'll stop there and pass things back off to Timur and Luke here. But before I do, I just want to thank everybody for your time today, and also encourage questions if there's anything that I haven't had the chance to cover in the last 40 minutes or so. Then we're happy to get back to you at as early as possible to get answers for those questions. With that, I'll pass things back to you, Tim. You're on mute, by the way.
Appreciate that. It never gets old. But thank you so much. And yes, towards the end, like Nick mentioned, if you have any questions, you can ask us now, or you can get in touch with your dedicated account manager at Binary Stream, as well as Turnkey. So you've got the contact details here. And since the slides will be shared with you as well, you will have everything handy. So with that, and Luke, if you don't have anything to add, and if there are no questions, we can end the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, like Timur just said, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Our contact link is there. We're always here to help. And yeah, if there's nothing there, this recording will also be posted on our website for reference as well. If you want to use that and go back and reference that. If not, you can always reach out to Binary Stream and whatnot if you have any more questions about things. So yeah, we just appreciate everyone joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.